Well, a warm welcome to you wherever you are looking at this webinar, whether it's the morning or the afternoon or the evening. Wherever you are around the world, we've got a whole lot of interesting people online, some small business operators, some consultants. We've got public sector, private sector, large and small businesses, and I'm sure a number of individuals who are interested in this whole topic of conversations. The book that this refers to is this one, which is Conversations at Work. I'll talk a little bit more about this later during the webinar, but this book is available on my website and all good bookstores, as they say. So warm welcome. I'll just turn off the video and we'll get straight into the presentation. Okay. I just want to make a couple of key points about conversations before we get underway, because I think there's a renewed interest in the whole idea of conversations, and I think there's good reason for that. And so I just wanted to cover some of those key points. First of all, in our book, that's the author Aubrey Warren and myself, in our book we say really up front that organisations are really conversations. And what we mean by that is that any organisation, whether it's public sector, private sector, not-for-profit, any organisation is really a bunch of people who collectively are working together to achieve an outcome. And throughout that process, they're obviously involved in hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of conversations over the lifetime of that business. And so in that sense, we say that organisations are conversations. So the critical thing really is, are those conversations productive? Are those conversations occurring when they need to occur? And what are those conversations about? And of course, I'm talking about 10 conversations here that I believe that any leader should have with his or her team. So organisations are conversations. And if you think about it, conversations go on in the lunchroom, they go on in the boardroom, they go on in the hallway, they go on around the water cooler, they go on in the car coming back from a customer or a client visit, they go on outside, inside, they go on everywhere, including the bathroom. So we have conversations everywhere. So we're used to that. So the question is, what is the nature of those conversations? So organisations, as I say, are really a series of conversations. So I make the point here that good conversation, or good quality conversation, is sadly neglected. Now, I think what's happening in our world is that we've got more and more technology that enables us to have conversations that are perhaps not traditional conversations. So we can have a Skype hookup, or we can even have a conversation through Twitter and so forth. And I think what's happening is that we're using a lot of this technology when sometimes, when it's convenient, of course, and possible, sometimes we should actually be sitting down and having a conversation with people, whether it's face-to-face or over a screen. So I think what we're finding, and I guess the point is, any of you that have travelled on public transport, think about this for a moment. If you're going home this evening, if you're at work, and you're going home on public transport, just pause for a moment and look around at the train or look around at the bus, and you'll find that everyone will have their head buried, of course, in a screen. You'll, of course, have to look up from your own screen to make notice of that, but obviously you know what I mean. And then, of course, when these people get home in the evening, they'll sit there and turn on another screen called a television, all the while doing their basically their updates on Facebook and social media. So we're living in a world when we're gravitating towards a series of screens, and I think that's fine, and I'm certainly not a Luddite, and I'm certainly not against all of that. Obviously it's a good thing, and it's helped us and it enables us to continue our communication process. The problem is, of course, that what happens is that a lot of us are having these social media conversations, when in fact what we really should be doing is actually having conversations around, face-to-face, or what we might call the traditional conversations. And that's the problem that we have. Now, the other point down there in the bottom left-hand corner is that we hear this all the time, don't we? The art of conversation. Some people have got this great ability to have conversations, and other people aren't particularly good at it. The truth of the matter is, I think there isn't much mystique to having conversations, and the reason for that is that you and I are having conversations daily, all the time. Some of them are formal, some of them are informal, some of them are positive, some of them are negative, some of them are meaningful, some of them are not, some of them are long, some of them are short. We're having all these conversations with people, so we're really actually quite good at it because we practice it a lot. So to suggest that there's some great art in conversations, I think, is a bit of a misnomer. There's no doubt that having difficult conversations does require a certain skill level, and certainly there are a plethora of courses and books and seminars out there on how to have the difficult conversation. And I don't doubt for a minute there are skills involved, but essentially the day-to-day conversations that I'm going to be talking about, these 10 conversations, quite frankly, they don't require any great art or skill. It just requires people actually sitting down and having these conversations. So I guess it poses the question, have we actually lost the need for conversations? And I guess my answer to that is no, I don't think we have. In fact, I think conversations are more and more important now in the world that we live in, when we're pretty much isolated through our social media, which is quite a paradox, isn't it? We can communicate using a whole mode of different ways of communicating, but yet in many ways it isolates us from people. So conversations are critically important, and the bottom line is this, that if you show me somebody who is an outstanding leader in the workplace, I will guarantee to you right now that they completely get this, and they understand the need to have conversations with their people, and they do so on a regular basis. It's just part of their repertoire. It's part of a good leader's repertoire. So to try to encourage managers to have more conversations in the workplace is going to provide a very useful context for the organisation. Of course, a lot of people will rationalise and say, well, I really don't have time for conversations. I'm too busy doing my work, in inverted commas, and the question is, what is that work? And so any leader should be about connecting and engaging with his or her team. And if you are connecting and engaging with your team and you're building trust levels up, then it's quite likely that productivity levels will go up too. And that happens through conversation. That happens through regular, meaningful, one-on-one dialogue. So to suggest that we don't have time for conversations is really saying, I don't see it as a priority. I've got other things to do. And I'm really not talking about the conversations here about how to do X or Y. I'm not talking about the project-based conversations. I'm talking very much around developmental type conversations. So allocating and finding time for these conversations is critically important. Kushner and Posner, who are great authors in the whole area of leadership, and I'd urge any of you who haven't read their work to get hold of their books. But in one of their books, which is entitled Credibility, made the magic phrase, or put together the magic phrase, leadership is a relationship, which I think is a wonderful phrase. So they've encapsulated this concept in their book called Credibility, and they're basically saying that leadership is a conversation. Now, our question is, if leadership is a relationship, then how do you form a relationship? And the only real way to do that, of course, is by building a trusting, meaningful dialogue, which of course is another way of saying having a conversation. So what I just wanted to do here at the outset is just add some context around why I think conversations are so important and what's actually happening out there in the world of work in relation to conversations. So what I want to do now is lead you through these 10 conversations that I believe that all leaders really should be having with their people. One is 5 conversations and another one is a framework which I actually call the 5 conversations framework. So let's actually have a go through and start looking at these. These conversations, by the way, aren't necessarily in any order, and I'm not suggesting for a minute that one's more important than the other. They've all got their place, and I would encourage anyone who's a leader to find the opportunities to actually engage in all of these conversations. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the coaching conversation, and this is the conversation around giving people the technical skills or even the interpersonal skills at more senior levels in the organisation, but done so in a very much in a coaching way. It's true that the higher somebody goes up in an organisation as a leader, the more their coaching is about people and managing situations than it is or should be about the technical aspects or the operational aspects of what people do in their work. The very best model that I know out there for coaching, and I'm sure some of you would be aware of this, is the GROW model. And GROW basically stands for goal, reality, options, and way forward. And the GROW model is easy to remember and is very powerful when it's done. In fact, in workshops, when I've actually explained to people how good this is, I've actually asked people to think about a dilemma that they're in, and I've actually led them through a series of questions around goal, reality, options, and way forward. And at the beginning, I've asked people to rate their level of optimism out of 10 in terms of how they think they can achieve, whether they believe they can overcome this particular dilemma in their life. And they might rate it a 3, but having led them through the GROW model, I asked them then to reflect and score again how they relate their level of optimism without actually going back and looking at their score. And inevitably what happens is people's score increases. Sometimes it'll go from a 3 to an 8, and it's basically going from a 3 to an 8 based on a series of structured questions around GROW. But more importantly, as the workshop facilitator, I don't know what the issues are. I'm not asking people to tell me, but what I'm finding is that I can actually increase people's optimism from 3 to an 8 by simply asking a series of questions. So just imagine if you're actually in a coaching environment talking to people about a real life issue that you're actually about. So GOAL stands for what are you trying to achieve? So a good way to start this coaching conversation is really to say to the other person, what's the end game here, or what are you actually trying to achieve? What's the outcome that you're aiming for, which of course is the goal, because most people will want to talk about all the things that are in the way of achieving what they want to achieve. So get them on a front foot and say, well, before you go any further and tell me what the blockages are or the barriers, tell me what the end result is. Tell me what it would look like. And once the person's actually gone through that process, they've painted a picture of what their ideal outcome is, then I'll move to the R, or the reality, and simply say, well, tell me about the reality. What's actually preventing you getting to that goal? Or what's getting in the way? Or what are the barriers that are in the way? And then I simply allow the other person to tell me what those barriers are, all the while not trying to interrupt and suggest that they try X or Y. I just want to hear what their assessment of the barriers are. Once we've exhausted that list, we then move into a process of actually asking, well, what are your options? And you'll notice it's plural on the screen. So the question then, so someone says, oh, well, one of the things I could do perhaps is I could go and consult somebody in my team, and the leader would say, that sounds good to me. What else could you consider? And then they might say, well, perhaps I can, I can actually spend some time reading up on this whole area and build my skill skills up, and the leader would say, yep, that's great, any other options? So the idea is to get an array of options out on the table, and then the final part of grow is then to say, well, what's the way forward, which might, as a question, be which of those options do you think is the most useful, or where to from here, or what do you need to do, or how can I assist you taking the next step? So grow is an outstanding model and works really well, and I'd commend it to you, and I know some of you are well aware of it, but for those of you that aren't, it's certainly a great way to start a coaching conversation. So that's the coaching conversation. People should be having those conversations obviously on a regular basis. Now, another form of conversation is the mentoring conversation. Now, mentoring is perhaps a little less formal than coaching, and normally what's discussed is a lot wider range of issues. Now, I don't know about you, but I've had a couple of really good mentors in my life, and I know it's a cliche, but it was life-changing. They might have just opened a door for me, or perhaps given me another perspective that I hadn't considered before, and this can be very, very powerful. So I don't necessarily advocate that the leader necessarily should be involved in a mentoring conversation with his or her team members. Sometimes that's not so easy because obviously they're in a power relationship. But there's nothing to stop your organisation actually implementing a mentoring program. But I do know there are a couple of things that are critical about mentoring. If you're wanting it to work, I think there are probably three things that are critical. One is that you need to allow people to select their mentors. There's no point in buddying people up because it's got to be a free choice arrangement. So the mentee needs to be able to make a decision about who they want to be mentored by, and the mentor equally must feel comfortable wanting to be that mentee's mentor. So that's important because it is very much about relationships. I think the second critical pathway to a successful mentoring program is actually training. You actually have to have training for mentors, and you have to have training for mentees as well. So the mentee training is, how do I get the best from my mentor, and what are my roles and responsibilities? And the mentor, of course, needs to know something about their role as well. So those two dimensions are absolutely critical. And the third dimension that's critical for success is not to make it too structured. So if you actually implemented a mentoring program where you said, right, you're expected to have 6 one-hour meetings every 6 months, that's not going to work, and it's just not necessarily practical. So you need to have a degree of flexibility in the program to allow mentors and mentees to come up to their own arrangements. There is actually a fourth dimension that's really important in a mentoring program, and that is there's got to be some clarity around the goals that the mentee wants to achieve in the program. So that is obviously the topic of conversation at the first mentoring meeting, to work out what it is that the mentee, and of course that can evolve and change and grow and so forth, and it can be quite an incremental process. So what the goal might be on the first session may not be the goal on session 3. So, but you've got to start somewhere. So mentoring is a really powerful way for building insight and giving people career advice and encouraging people and giving people direction and modeling behavior. So there's a whole bunch of really powerful things in the mentoring program. Very, very few people I've come across who have been mentors have said to me, oh, I don't like that. I got nothing out of that mentoring conversation. Funnily enough, the mentors get as much out of it as the mentees. And so it's hard to get people to the start line to be mentors because they don't envisage getting a lot out of it themselves. But once you get them to the start line and they're involved, they're actually committed. And it's the same, of course, with mentees when they've developed and struck up a good relationship with their mentor. So that's one to consider. The third type of conversation that all leaders need to have is delegation. And of course, we all know that delegation is such a simple concept, but in practice, it doesn't happen as well as it should. In other words, a lot of leaders hold on to things that they should be delegating to other people. They'll rationalise that they can get it done a lot faster. By the time I explain it to someone else, I might as well have done it. The truth be known, a lot of leaders hold on to tasks that they should be delegating because they actually enjoy doing them. And a lot of people who don't delegate do so because they're control freaks. They would rather be in complete control of what's going on around them. So there's a whole lot of barriers in the way to prevent leaders from delegating, and that can be a real issue. But I want to talk about delegation conversation from the point of view of development here. I think that good leaders do involve others in delegation conversations as a developmental tool. So how other people can be developed in their roles, so taking on extra responsibility or what have you. So I think that there's no real excuse for leaders not to be involved in delegation conversations. Delegation conversations do not mean sitting down and barking out a couple of directions about what people need to have achieved before the next meeting. That's not what I'm talking about, of course. It's a collaborative approach. In fact, I like the model that you can see in front of you. I think it's a very useful model where you've got 5 stages, basically, of delegation. Stage 1 is a realisation. So that's where the employee actually gains some sort of realisation or consciousness that the manager is doing something that, for example, the manager might be very well prepared in the morning and fill out complete a to-do list. That employee might be wondering why that manager's always so well organised and never forgets deadlines and so forth. And then there's the realisation that they complete a to-do list. The manager then is observed by the employee, so there's an observation stage, and they watch how they do, how they organise themselves. Then the person might come up to the manager and talk to them about this particular to-do list, and the manager might then work with them to help them complete the to-do list. And then the manager will perhaps give some feedback to the employee on how they're completing their to-do list and so forth. So there's an evaluation process. And then the person, once they become competent, off they go and they complete whatever they need to do. And the manager's input there is minimal. So there's a number of different models out there, but really there's no excuse for leaders not delegating. And leaders that say to me that I don't have enough time to do this, this and this, I often ask them and say, well, what are you doing that you could be delegating? And usually the list is quite long and quite scary. And so there's no excuse for not having a delegation conversation on a regular basis with team members. The next conversation is the visioning conversation. I just, well, actually not just, about a year ago, I read a book, The Why of Work, great title, by Dave and Wendy Ulrich. But basically the message here about the visioning conversation is the why. We need to explain to people why. Why are we asking them to do this? Why are we asking them to do that? In other words, we should be giving people a context around why they are actually doing what might seem like drudgery. So, for example, if it's in the production area and I'm the supervisor and I'm asking somebody to sweep the floor, and I haven't done that in the past, I'm asking them to sweep the floor, I could just simply say, sweep the floor, please. But if I could also say to them that the reason I'm asking you to sweep the floor is basically that we've got a very important potential customer coming in this afternoon. They want to have a look around in the production area, and they're seriously considering, putting in a $250,000 order, and we just want to set the very best example that we can. And that's why I'm asking you to sweep the floor. So that person's got a context around why I'm asking them to do that. They understand the big picture. And I don't think that leaders do enough of that. Explain the why. The why of work is absolutely critical. So even something as mundane as sweeping the floor can be put in a context. So anything that's more complicated should be put around a context. People need to understand how it links in with the strategic direction of the business. So visioning conversations are critically important. One that I think is sadly neglected out there in the world of work is the encouraging conversation, just encouraging people. And I find it fascinating that a lot of leaders don't see it as their role to actually encourage their people. I think one of the reasons for this, to be honest, is that a lot of leaders are self-motivated, and what's happened is they've got to their position through their own sort of, basic efforts. They haven't really needed perhaps a high level of encouragement from their boss. So they're making a false assumption that the people that they lead don't need the encouragement that they didn't need, which of course is completely wrong. And if you actually look at some of the interesting research in this area, employees are actually very clear about this, that they don't feel that they're getting enough encouragement from their boss. And this is one of the quotes from our book. The key to bringing out the best in others is to express appreciation, knowledge, contribution, and celebrate achievements. Now, this can be done on the run, and it's not a long conversation. But to actually say to people 2 magic words can mean a lot. And those words are, thank you. How often do we hear that in the world of work? Just actually sitting down with someone, looking them in the eye, and thanking them for the effort that they made and the difference it made can make a huge difference. That's encouraging. Recognising people's achievements by mentioning that to them is extremely important. Celebrating their achievements as well. We don't do enough of this, and I've often set managers a task, and they've actually said to them, for the next week, I want you to find 3 opportunities every day to have an encouraging conversation. And then they come back to me in the next coaching session, and the results are amazing. They, they talk about energy levels. It's a happier workplace. Productivity's gone up. People are going the extra mile. I'm getting all of this feedback, and that's just coming from an encouraging conversation. And of course, I'm talking, all these conversations are genuine. I don't mean for a minute that we start thanking people for things that we're not thankful for. I'm talking about being genuine and being more of who we are as leaders. I think the results can be quite astounding. So the encouraging conversation is definitely one to think about. Now, those are 5 conversations that I think are critical, and there's another framework which some of you would be aware of called the 5 Conversations Framework. You can implement this immediately. It's not difficult. Some organisations are implementing this framework instead of their performance review. They're finding it so powerful and useful. Others are using it as an enabler to ensure that their performance review is more effective. And basically, it's a pretty simple concept, but very, very powerful and easy to underestimate. Essentially, it works like this, that every leader in an organisation is expected to have one 10-minute conversation with each of his or her team members once a month for 5 months. So basically, over a 5-month period, I'm having 5 10-minute conversations with every person in my team. And then what happens is that, they go through another cycle of the 5 conversations later in the year. So organisations that have implemented this are having 10 10-minute conversations, that is, every manager is having 10 10-minute conversations with the people that work with them every year. Do you think that would make a difference? Absolutely. It makes a huge difference. Now, a lot of people are skeptical. I say, oh, well, 10 minutes. Well, it is 10 minutes in the sense that I actually have a framework, give people the questions to ask. So it's really not difficult to do. I have no doubt that some of those conversations go on a lot longer than 10 minutes, but that's through mutual choice. And sometimes it's a good thing that they do go on for more than 10 minutes, but they need not go on for more than 10 minutes. So let me just run through very briefly, for those of you that aren't aware of how this framework works, and maybe give some different insight for those that do know. There is a particular reason why we have the order here. So obviously you've got the date over here and the topic order. The climate review is very much around three concepts: job satisfaction, morale, and communication. I'm simply trying to get a handle on how people are in my work team. My very first question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your current job satisfaction? 10 is high, 1 is low. They might say 6. My next question, of course, is why? Why do you rate it a 6? And they give me a reason, and I'm a little bit more enlightened about that. And then I ask the question, well, do you think it's possible to improve on the 6? And if so, what do we need to do? So, you have a conversation around that, and it can be a very useful conversation for the leader to actually hear where people are at. In month 2, we have a strengths and talents conversation, and this is essentially focusing on what people are good at. We're very, very good at picking up on what people aren't good at, and we're very good at actually explaining to people what they're not good at, but we don't seem to put the same energy and focus on things that people are actually not good at, the things that people are good at. Let's start with what people are good at. And so let's start on an upward spiral in terms of this framework. Now, there are a whole lot of diagnostics out there that give people a real handle on what their strengths are. I personally use the team management systems suite of products. You've got MBTI, you've got personality profiles. There's a whole bunch of things out there. So there's no excuse for us not to be able to find what people are good at, and then having a conversation around that. And essentially what that conversation is really about is, how can we deploy those strengths and talents in your current and future role here in this organisation? That's essentially what we're trying to do. So for example, if somebody is wonderful with customers, but they're locked away somewhere doing technical work, then it stands to reason for that leader to try to find opportunities to free that person up from some of their technical work to be able to go and talk to customers. Why? Because they're good at it. And the employee is going to feel a lot better about their work, they're going to be better utilised, and everybody's going to be happier. So we talk about strengths and talents. So that's the strengths and talents conversation. The opportunities for growth conversation is very much around things that people have to work on to improve on. So there's always things that all of us have to work on and improve. And it's important for all leaders to have a conversation about that on a regular basis. And if possible, if there is a skill in this area, it is about getting the actual employee themselves to actually identify what the opportunities for growth are so that they own them. So I would be, when I'm having these conversations with people, I will actually ask them, well, what's one area that you believe that you could develop further? And then we'll work with that. And I might make another suggestion if I feel that there's something that's a greater priority. But I'm wanting people to own that. So we don't have enough conversations around that. It's sort of implied, but it's not discussed. And of course, we want commitment from the person that they're going to do something about improving in that area. And that's part of the conversation. The learning and development conversation is really around opportunities to grow and develop. If you've had a strengths and talents conversation, you've had an opportunities for growth conversation, then clearly there's going to be some opportunities for learning out of those two, whether it is to capitalise on strengths or overcome opportunities for growth. And it might not be about sending people away to courses. It could just simply be coaching, having a coaching conversation, or linking them up with a mentor, or linking them back to some of those other conversations that we've talked about. So that becomes an important conversation in month 4. Now in month 5 we have an innovation and continuous improvement conversation. So I don't think it's an unreasonable expectation that people will come to work thinking about ways and means of being more efficient and more effective in their work from an organisational perspective. So I'm interested to have conversations with people about what they think might be some areas that we can work on in the business to improve what we do. And why shouldn't we have a conversation about that? Now, it's pretty exciting when you think about it. If you, let's say you've got a business in round figures of 100 employees, and you know that in month 5 you're having everybody in that organisation, that's 100 people in that organisation, are having a conversation around innovation and continuous improvement, there will inevitably be some fantastic ideas that are surfaced as a result of those 100 conversations. And because of that, there'll be a handful of gems that can be further developed just by having that conversation. So you can see the power of conversations in terms of how it can improve productivity and performance in a workplace. So there are 5 conversations in that framework to add to the 5 conversations that I went through in the previous framework. And people will often say to me, oh, well, I just haven't got time for all those conversations. As I said earlier, this is not a long-winded conversation. It's a short, sharp, meaningful, focused conversation. And at the end of the day, if you haven't got time to talk to your people, then I would argue that you're not actually leading, despite what you might think. So it's really important to find the time for those conversations. Okay, that pretty much brings us to questions, and I'm sure many of you have got questions that you'd like to ask me. So just for those of you that might not be aware of how this works, if you look over on the right-hand side, there's a question box there. Just simply type in your question, and I'd be more than happy to answer, because we've got several minutes before we finish up. But I just want to get through those 10 conversations that managers must, or leaders must have, and I'm sure it's prompted a lot of questions. So please go ahead and type in your questions. There are a couple there already, and I'll deal with them immediately, but while I'm dealing with those, you might like to also type your question in as well. Just before I do that, what you're seeing on your screen is a bunch of webinars that I've got coming up, and I've decided to get organised this year, and I have organised a webinar once a month, so you can see all the topics there for the webinars. Now, if you're interested in registering for any of those, and they're all free of charge, if you just simply go to my website, www.winnersatwork.com.au, and you'll find that over on the left-hand side, you can click on any of these topics, and it'll take you straight to the registration as you've done today. So you're more than welcome. You can register as many of those as you want. Dates and times are set. Content is set. It's just a matter of you going in. All you've got to do is type in your first name and your email address, and you're away. So, little plug for my upcoming webinar series. So now what I would like to do is just to, I'll come back to this little plug in a moment, but one of the questions in the question box there that I'll respond to is a question that talks about scheduling time for conversations. How do I schedule time for conversations? Thanks, Melissa. The answer to that is, it's a good question, and I think that sometimes that's actually what you do need to do. That if you don't schedule it in, what happens is you get completely bombarded with a whole bunch of other things that go on in your workplace, and you never get around to having these conversations. I talked to somebody, a senior CEO in a very large organisation recently. This CEO has 14,000 employees, and has a senior executive team of 18. And I encouraged him to sit down with each of his senior executive for a short, sharp conversation before breaking for Christmas. And you can imagine how difficult it would be and how busy this person would be with 14,000 employees. But to his credit, he called in his executive assistant, and he asked the executive assistant to clear the diary for 2 days. So basically, he cleared the diary for 2 days and had a series of one-on-one conversations with each of his senior team over those 2 days. And he came back to me and he said that was the best time that I've invested. I knew it was important, but I just needed to allocate the time. So I think the answer to your question is really sometimes you just have to actually allocate the time and actually sort of block out a morning or maybe a full day depending on the size of the team or whatever, and actually as you would put in any meeting into your calendar, we all do, why wouldn't you put in a series of conversations as well? Because obviously if you don't put them in there, something else will go in their place, and then of course you'll be complaining that you don't have enough time to have these conversations. So I think there's probably definitely an opportunity to do that. Okay, we've got another question here. Why do good leaders understand the value of conversations? That's a good question. Why do they understand the value? I think the essence of a good leader is that they actually understand that their role or their job essentially is to get the very best from the people that they lead. They kind of intuitively understand that that's what they're there for. And in order to get the very best from people, I think they actually understand that they've got to build a professional working relationship with each person in their team as much as they possibly can. And of course, the vehicle to do that is conversation, and that's how they do it. And I think that can be very, very powerful means of doing that. So it's a good question you ask, but I think that's essentially the reason. Whereas somebody who perhaps is a mediocre leader might actually think that their role is very much about getting the product out the door or whatever. I'm not suggesting for a minute that's not important, but they might just bypass the actual people dimension of what they do, and then that's their rationale or their excuse for not having enough conversations with their people. So I think leaders intuitively understand that it's about the people, and they've never lost sight of that, and their people of course pick up on that very, very quickly. Okay, we've got another question here. I'll just scroll down. Oh, it's actually a comment. I encourage managers to delegate the setting up of conversations to their employees. This creates responsibility and accountability for all employees to own their career and performance. It allows managers to focus on the content of the conversation rather than the logistics. That's fantastic advice. I totally agree. Yeah, absolutely. The more we can get any employee to own their development, the better. And I said at the outset of this webinar that there's no such thing as the art of conversation. I think if there's it's not so much an art, but at the end of the day, it's about getting people to own what they're doing, and whether it's, as this comment makes out, it's to delegate something, or whether it's to get them to develop themselves. Absolutely, I totally agree. So well done and thank you. Another question here is, how do we sell the benefits of a conversation culture? It's a good question. Look, without going overboard, my book, or our book, does go into that in great detail. It talks about the barriers. It talks about the ways that you can actually promote that. But look, at the end of the day, it starts with the senior team. Now, if the senior team are not walking the talk, so to speak, in other words, if they're not having conversations with their people, regular, meaningful dialogue with the people that report to them, then I would say that it's futile, because obviously that's setting the tone of the organisation. So we're expecting the place to start is at the senior team, and if you are a senior manager, it's actually encouraging that, because if you don't encourage that at that level, people will hear what's being said and do what's been seen, which of course is a lack of conversations. So I think it's about convincing the senior team. And again, many leaders in very large organisations spend the first month of their CEO role getting around, out and about, having conversations with people, people at all levels of the organisation in all departments. Part of it is a fact-finding mission to understand what's going on in the organisation, and another is so that they can build up rapport and trust and a whole range of other matters. So obviously there's a whole lot of benefits there. So it's a good question you ask. It's interesting. A CEO of a medium-sized organisation, if you like, and in fact the organisation was 120. The CEO on his very first day, in fact his very first couple of weeks, had a series of conversations with each and every member of the organisation. And the CEO actually started by asking a simple but powerful question. His question was, what do you like about working here? Brilliant question, because had he not asked that question, I don't doubt for a minute that he would have received a barrage of negativity about what was wrong and why this isn't working and so forth and so on. He actually went and asked a more positive question. Why do you like working here? And, you know, obviously out of that conversation, there are a whole lot of things that perhaps weren't working as well as they could. He picked up on those things, but he wanted to know why people enjoyed working there. He wanted to know what the essence of the organisation was about. And I think that was a fantastic way to start his dialogue in the organisation. It's an excellent approach to go about things. Okay, so any other questions? I'm just having a look down here to see if there are any other questions that people might like to ask. There's a statement or a comment here about, I agree with the value of appreciating and thanking people for their efforts. Thank you for that affirmation. I think, look, at the very fundamental level, thanking people for the work that they do goes a long way. It's so simple to do, yet so underestimated. And you can do it in a very genuine way. It can take 2 or 3 minutes at the absolute most, and it will make all the difference in the world. And it's obviously it's got to be done genuinely. And if it is done genuinely, and it is done sincerely, and it is explained why the leader is thanking the person, then that person will walk away pleased. They may not actually show it on their face, but that's not the point. They'll feel it, and that's all that's important. And we all like to feel that we're making some sort of a contribution, and we all like to be recognised for that contribution. And the leader's job is to do exactly that. And of course, that is part of the encouraging conversation, which is often missing. And a lot of managers will say, and I find this absolutely fascinating, they'll say to me, if you don't, or not me personally, but to their employees, if you don't hear from me, then you know things are going well. You will only hear from me if there's a problem. You know, I wouldn't mind $100 for every time I've heard that comment mentioned, which is, it's a very poor way of going about things. Of course, people need to hear from you when things aren't going well. They also need to hear from you when things are going right. And I would encourage leaders to be giving that feedback as well, because people actually need to hear that. It becomes quite critical. Okay, I think that pretty much brings us to the end. Just a quick plug. Apart from the webinars, go to the website and by all means register for any of those free webinars. The other thing is I'm offering you 20% discount on my book, Conversations, or our book, Conversations at Work. So it's normally at a recommended retail price of $39. We will give it to you for $31.20 plus postage if you send me an email by 12 midnight tonight. If you send me an email, I'll send you back a code. Then you can go to the website, put the code in, you'll get your 20% discount. I'll sign the book for you and you'll get your book within days. So something that you might like to take advantage of, and I just wanted to thank you very much for taking the time to be in this webinar today. And if I can assist by answering any other questions offline, I'm more than happy to do that. So you've got my email address up there in the top left-hand corner. So thank you very much. I've enjoyed working with you. I know some of you are loyal supporters of this program, so thanks for coming back. And for those new ones, I hope we can see you again in the future. Thank you.